Roughly 70 millennia ago, an event occurred that would irrevocably transform the Earth. A tiny band of humans, perhaps numbering only a few hundred, gathered at the boundary of Africa. They chose to do something that, upon reflection, appears utterly mad. They departed. Stepping away from the sole home their kind had ever experienced, they journeyed into territories completely untouched by human presence. Without any guidance, provisions, or foreknowledge of what lay ahead, they set forth and never returned. In the present day, every individual living beyond Africa, the entire 7 billion of us spread over 6 continents, bears the genetic imprint of those first adventurers. We are all their offspring. Those viewing this from Tokyo, London, Sao Paulo, or Sydney, your forebears took part in the most remarkable migration ever narrated. And here's the astonishing twist. We are only beginning to discover the true events of their journey. If you are listening to drift off, that's precisely the purpose of this content. So consider subscribing. And please, share your location and the current time. I read the comments, and it's truly astonishing. Melbourne sipping morning coffee, Miami in the dead of night, Moscow enjoying lunch all simultaneously. This is rather fitting for a tale of how humanity dispersed across the globe. So, what befell those early humans who departed Africa? In brief, nearly everything conceivable and much that is not. They confronted Ice Age megafauna that would haunt your dreams. They traversed terrains so forbidding that even today's survival specialists would balk at trying. They encountered other human species, ones we only discovered recently, and against all odds, they endured everything. Yet this narrative goes beyond mere survival. It is one of metamorphosis, because those people who left Africa 70,000 years ago were not exactly like us. Their brain size was identical. They likely possessed language. They crafted tools and mastered fire, yet along those thousands of years of movement, something shifted, something involving confronting the unfamiliar, adjusting to vastly disparate habitats, and meeting other kinds of humans clashing or intermingling with them. All this molded us into our present form. You see, for the bulk of the past 200 millennia, humans existed solely in Africa. We evolved there. We dwelled there. Our physiques were adapted for African weather and African habitats. Then abruptly, within merely a few tens of thousands of years, humans inhabited every corner. In the frigid Arctic, with temperatures plunging to -40, in the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, where diverse illnesses hid in each water body, in the Australian desert, where almost nothing in the surroundings resembled what our African forebears were familiar with. How did this come about? How did a creature suited for the African plains wind up prospering in virtually every climatic region on the planet, barring Antarctica? And what was the price they paid? The findings from researchers over the past 10 years are truly startling. We now understand that those initial humans exiting Africa faced more than just severe climates. They came across other humans, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in Eastern Asia, and perhaps other groups we have yet to identify. Moreover, our forebears did not merely battle these other humans, they also produced offspring with them. Presently, if your heritage is European or Asian, roughly 1 to 4% of your genetic material originates from Neanderthals. If you trace your ancestry to Melanesia or Aboriginal Australia, you also possess Denisovan DNA. Reflect on that. You are not fully Homo sapiens. You are a mixture. All of us share this. The people who departed Africa interbred with other species to such an extent that genetically pure Homo sapiens are essentially absent beyond sub-Saharan Africa. Yet genetic intermingling is merely the opening chapter. The true wonder lies in the specifics of how these journeys unfolded. How did humans navigate the Red Sea? Did they construct vessels or traverse land bridges that have since vanished? How did they endure in Central Asia during the most recent glacial period, when ice sheets blanketed half of Eurasia? What sustained them? Where did they rest? How did they safeguard their young? And here is the puzzle that troubles anthropologists after dark. Why did they persist? After leaving Africa, when they discovered a spot with water, sustenance, and tolerable climate, Why continue venturing into the unknown? What propels a species to keep moving until they have physically reached the planet's farthest corners? Over the coming hours, we will trace those ancient steps. Let's begin at that pivotal instant of departure, when tiny groups of humans bravely chose to venture out of Africa. We'll follow their footsteps as they journey across continents, adjusting to unfamiliar surroundings, encountering other humankinds, and forging fresh innovations. We'll delve into the true nature of daily existence for those Ice Age trailblazers, and we'll discover how their travels, their hardships, their triumphs, and their losses, every single part of it reverberates within our genes and traditions, even now. For this is not a dusty relic of the past. This is your own story. Here lies the tale of how a handful of African wanderers transformed into the entire human family across the globe. It's the chronicle of what unfolded when people walked away from their birthplace and never glanced behind. So settle in. This voyage will be a lengthy one. Yet, after all, our forebears required 60 millennia to finish this trek. We have ample time themselves. So what compelled them to depart? Following eons in Africa, after enduring the genetic squeeze, after crafting the implements and knowledge that brought them prosperity, why would a modest band of contemporary humans choose to abandon all they recognized and step into the utterly mysterious? The reply isn't straightforward. Human actions rarely are. Yet roughly 70,000 years in the past, a confluence of factors started thrusting and drawing our forefathers toward the doorways. Foremost, the climate underwent upheaval. And this wasn't a gentle rising temperature or a slow cooling across thousands of years. This involved fierce, abrupt alterations capable of reshaping entire terrains within one person's lifespan. Approximately 74,000 years before the present, the volcano Mount Toba on the island of Indonesia unleashed what Earth scientists classify as a super eruption. It stands as the most colossal volcanic occurrence in the last 2 million years. This titan spewed roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and stone into the air. For comparison, the 1,980 blast of Mount St. Helens released about 1 cubic kilometer. Toba's force was almost 3,000 times greater. The resulting ash veils encircled the Earth, dimming the sun for years, perhaps even many decades. Worldwide temperatures dropped by up to 10 degrees Celsius in certain areas. Across Africa, the weather swung swiftly from fairly steady to harshly erratic. Droughts grew fiercer. The rhythms of rain transformed. Communities of flora and fauna collapsed. Investigations into the genetics of present-day humans reveal signs of what researchers term a demographic bottleneck during that period. It wasn't as harsh as the squeeze 900,000 years before, yet it was notable. Possibly, the global human count shrank to merely 10,000 people, or even fewer. For communities situated along shorelines or in places with diverse sustenance options, this was endurable. Tough, yet endurable. However, for bands dwelling inland, distant from reliable water and relying on particular plants or creatures, it spelled disaster. This situation generated urgency not only to endure but also to migrate, seeking fresh lands brimming with untouched supplies, to disperse so that one localized catastrophe couldn't annihilate a whole people. Yet mere stress doesn't clarify why contemporary humans managed to exit Africa triumphantly while prior efforts fell short. This was not the initial occasion Homo sapiens attempted to spread past Africa. Artifacts indicate modern people inhabited the Levant, present-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria as far back as 120,000 years ago. Those pioneers built communities, fashioned implements, and endured for millennia. Eventually they vanished, fully displaced by Neanderthal groups migrating southward. What then set apart the exodus occurring roughly 60,000 years ago? What transformation enabled this venture to triumph where previous ones collapsed? The solution is what paleoanthropologists label the cognitive revolution. And it could be the most crucial evolutionary advance in humanity's entire narrative. At some point between 100,000 and 70,000 years back, an alteration occurred within the human mind, not in its physical shape. Skulls of modern humans from 200,000 years ago are nearly indistinguishable from those of 50,000 years ago. The shift was neurological, behavioral, and cognitive in nature. All of a sudden, the archaeological data erupts with proofs of advanced symbolic reasoning. Rock art emerges in Africa, meticulously made bone utensils and ornaments, refined weaponry. Above all, traces of far-reaching trade webs hinting at elaborate social bonds and exchange of ideas. This marks the era when humans commenced abstract reasoning at an unprecedented magnitude across any species. They started producing creative works not simply for adornment, but to impart significance. They forged intricate speech, able to converse about matters not right in front of them. Happenings of earlier times, forthcoming schemes, intangible notions such as familial duties and land borders. People began recounting tales, and tales transform everything. Armed with speech sufficiently nuanced to transmit elaborate chronicles, they could exchange precise information about remote lands, secure paths, watering holes, perilous creatures. They could sustain connections with communities they hadn't encountered in many years. They could orchestrate endeavors over enormous spaces and extended durations. That intellectual transformation bestowed upon the people departing Africa, roughly 60,000 years ago, a gift their counterparts from 60,000 years before lacked. A cognitive arsenal that rendered them not merely flexible but proactively inventive, not only survivors but true discoverers. When those prior humans came upon Neanderthals in the Levant, they faced a kind that was physically stronger and ideally suited to the regional surroundings. The initial modern people held no specific edge. Therefore, the Neanderthals, protecting known ground with survival tactics honed across hundreds of millennia, prevailed. Yet the humans who embarked from Africa 60,000 years ago, in those distant times, the world was different, with technologies and social structures that turned out to be decisive. So how did these people manage to leave? The traditional account says they crossed the Sinai land bridge that once linked Africa to Asia. And indeed, some humans did use that route, but genetic evidence suggests the main migration happened elsewhere. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, that narrow channel separating the Horn of Africa from Arabia. Today, it's roughly 20 miles wide at its narrowest, with deep waters and strong currents. Crossing it would have required boats, navigation skills, and careful planning. But 60,000 years ago, during the Ice Age, sea levels were much lower. Vast amounts of water were locked up in glaciers, and the Bab el-Mandeb was only a few miles wide. It may have been dotted with islands that served as stepping stones. This is the coastal migration theory. Instead of walking through Sinai into harsh deserts, the theory holds that modern humans crossed the Bab el-Mandeb. After that, they followed the coastline eastward along Arabia, Persia, India, and Southeast Asia. Coastal routes offer huge advantages: a steady supply of fresh water, abundant food from both land and sea, natural harbors, and clear landmarks. For people who had lived beside African lakes and rivers for centuries, following coastlines was natural. The challenge in proving this theory is that most of those ancient coastlines are now underwater. Sea levels have risen over 300 feet since the Ice Age. The archaeological sites where those migrants would have lived are buried beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. Yet we have found some clues. Stone tools dated to around 55,000 years ago at Jebel Faya in the United Arab Emirates. Shell middens in Oman suggesting systematic seafood harvesting. Tool assemblages that look distinctly African rather than Middle Eastern. This indicates these were not Neanderthals, but actual migrants from Africa. Most tellingly, genetic analysis of modern populations supports the coastal route. The oldest DNA lineages outside Africa appear first in Arabia, then along the coasts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. Exactly the pattern you would expect if people were following shorelines eastward. But whether they crossed at Bab el-Mandeb or walked through Sinai, one thing is clear: not many of them made the journey. Genetic analysis suggests the founding population of all non-African humans might have been as small as 1,000 individuals, maybe 10,000 at most. Just think about that. Every person alive today who is not of purely African descent, all the Europeans, Asians, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, all of us trace our ancestry back to a group of people who could have fit comfortably in a modern high school gymnasium. This makes sense from a migration perspective. Moving into unknown territory is risky. You do not send your entire tribe. You send scouts, young people, probably the adventurous ones. those with less to lose and more to gain from finding new hunting grounds. These pioneers would have been the best their communities had to offer, the finest hunters, the most skilled tool makers, the boldest explorers. Natural selection does not only happen through death, it also happens through who decides to take risks and who plays it safe. And what did they bring with them? What tools and knowledge did this small group carry as they stepped into a world no modern human had successfully colonized before? First, they had sophisticated stone tool technology. Not just simple hand axes, but carefully crafted blade tools made using prepared core techniques. Long, sharp cutting edges created by striking flakes off specially shaped stone cores. These blades could be attached to wooden or bone handles with plant resins, forming composite tools that were far more effective than anything their ancestors had possessed. They had throwing spears tipped with carefully shaped stone points, not for thrusting at close range like Neanderthal spears, but for throwing from a distance using spear throwers called atlatls, which could launch projectiles with deadly accuracy at ranges Neanderthals could not match. They carried fishing gear, bone hooks, and possibly nets woven from plant fibers. The cognitive revolution had taught them to systematically exploit aquatic resources, not just occasionally. They knew how to make fire reliably. This sounds basic, but it is crucial. Earlier humans could use fire if they found it from lightning strikes or natural blazes, but modern humans could create it on demand using friction methods or by striking sparks from pyrite. This meant they could venture into colder climates and survive. They could cook food, making nutrients more accessible and killing parasites. They could use fire to harden wooden tools, to drive game in hunts, and to clear land. They had clothing not just animal skins thrown over shoulders, but fitted garments created with bone needles and sinew thread. The invention of the eyed needle, a tiny piece of carved bone or ivory with a hole for thread, might seem trivial, but it allowed humans to create cold-weather clothing that could keep them alive in climates that would kill them in hours without protection. Most importantly, they had language, a complex, sophisticated language capable of conveying abstract ideas, sharing detailed technical knowledge, maintaining social relationships, and telling stories that could preserve information across generations. This last point cannot be overstated. It was language that enabled human knowledge to build up over time rather than being perpetually relearned. A Neanderthal youngster needed to learn solely through watching and doing. In contrast, a modern human child could listen to tales that passed down the gathered insights of many generations, for instance, where to locate water in arid regions. Certain plants were toxic. Indications in the sky announced approaching rain. Animal herds moved with the changing seasons. Through narratives, humans gained the ability to learn from individuals they had never encountered, from forebears who had passed away before their birth. This phenomenon is cultural evolution, and it functions across a timescale entirely distinct from that of genetic evolution. Rather than requiring millennia to disseminate beneficial traits, modern humans were able to transmit new ideas within a single lifetime. They introduced intricate societal frameworks, far-reaching kinship ties that preserved links over hundreds of kilometers, and systems of marital exchange that forged bonds between communities. They also developed chains of command that could coordinate expansive collaborative efforts. Additionally, they established trading connections that transported precious commodities, such as superior stone for toolmaking, over extensive areas. Excavations from that era provide proof of these networks. Stone implements are discovered at spots hundreds of miles away from the source of the raw material. Seashells fashioned into beads are found at inland locations remote from any coastline. Uniform patterns of tools appear across various territories, indicating that these groups exchanged technical know-how through ongoing interaction. These were not isolated clusters of humans drifting aimlessly. Rather, this was an interconnected community, able to orchestrate migration, exchange intelligence, and provide mutual assistance across expanses that would require weeks to traverse. And indeed, they accomplished this. All of this was necessary because the territories they were venturing into were already inhabited, not by fellow modern humans, but by their evolutionary relatives who had resided outside Africa for hundreds of millennia. The Neanderthals held dominion over the entirety of Europe and Western Asia. The Denisovans ruled over Eastern Asia. Both species were exquisitely suited to their habitats. Both possessed centuries of accumulated familiarity with the land. Both presented formidable rivals for sustenance and territory. The initial emigrants from Africa would have been unaware of these facts. They were merely seeking fresh hunting areas, unclaimed lands where resources were not yet being harvested by rival bands. However, they were entering a realm where they would need to vie with hominin species that possessed the benefit of local knowledge. Archaeological digs on the Arabian Peninsula reveal the first footsteps of these trailblazers. The Jebel Faya site, dating back roughly 127,000 years, marks one of the earliest efforts. It features basic stone implements resembling those from Africa, along with signs of foraging and hunting. Then, a void. The location was deserted, likely when the climate worsened. Yet, sites from 60,000 years ago reveal a contrasting narrative. More advanced implements appear, along with indications of extended habitation. Clues suggest that these newcomers were not simply transient, but were creating lasting settlements. In the Levant, locations such as the Kafsa and School caves exhibit evidence of modern human dwelling from approximately 100,000 years ago. These initial migrants lived alongside Neanderthals for a period, perhaps even engaging in trade or contact. However, ultimately, the modern humans vanished, supplanted by Neanderthal groups. The prior cognitive revolution had not yet occurred. These forerunners lacked the technological and societal benefits that would emerge in later times. Yet, the emigrants who departed roughly 60,000 years ago were distinct. Upon meeting Neanderthals in the Middle East, they arrived with implements and tactics capable of holding their own. As they traced shorelines into Asia, they could utilize food resources that Denisovans had neglected. As they advanced into unfamiliar regions, they could adjust more rapidly than their evolutionary relatives, thanks to a more adaptable culture, more inventive technology, and more intricate social organization. The archaeological evidence traces their journey like scattered crumbs across the ancient globe. Stone implements appear in Arabia by 55,000 years ago. Signs of habitation emerge in India by 50,000 years ago. Southeast Asia by 45,000 years ago. Australia, which demanded advanced boat construction and wayfinding, was reached by 42,000 years ago. This was not a single enormous migratory surge. Rather, it involves sequential generations, each advancing slightly deeper into unexplored lands. A band would inhabit a particular area for several centuries. The numbers would increase. Some of the younger members would then venture farther east, north, or south. They would found new communities. Once again, the population would expand. This cycle would continue. By modern measures, it was a gradual process. The trek from Africa to Southeast Asia likely spanned 15,000 years. Countless generations lived and perished, each inching the frontier of human settlement a bit farther outward. Yet it was unyielding, and once set in motion, this spread never truly ceased until modern humans had populated every livable continent. They triumphed where prior efforts had faltered because they introduced something truly original. It was not larger brains or more powerful physiques. Neanderthals surpassed them in both regards. Rather, they brought behavioral modernity, the full suite of mental faculties that enabled them not merely to endure in unfamiliar surroundings, but to flourish, invent, and perpetually adjust. They carried with them the distilled wisdom of hundreds of millennia of African survival tactics, honed throughout times of upheaval into pure adaptability. They conveyed tales that imparted knowledge without requiring direct personal experience. They introduced social frameworks capable of rallying tens or even hundreds of individuals for synchronized endeavors. They possessed tools that could be altered and refined every generation, rather than staying unchanged for eons. When those 1,000 to 10,000 trailblazers departed Africa, they were bearing the destiny of humankind. Unbeknownst to them, they were simply seeking improved hunting areas, steadier water supplies, lands not already teeming with rival groups. Yet, within their genetics, their implements, their narratives, and their societal systems, they held everything necessary. This would ultimately enable modern humans to come to rule the earth. The era of humanity's worldwide spread had commenced. This grand expedition would only conclude once humanity had marked every continent with its presence and reshaped the planet's surface entirely. Trials beyond their comprehension awaited them on this path. Icy deserts across Europe, soaring plateaus in Asia, maritime voyages to Australia, and the extended trek over Beringia into the Americas. Every kind of terrain our planet could present, they would face and ultimately conquer. However, those challenges lay far in the future. At that moment, they were merely a modest band of people who traced the shorelines, feasted on shellfish, and pursued strange prey. Gradually, they advanced eastward into a realm that had never witnessed such beings. So commenced the most remarkable migration in human history, followed by an encounter that would seal humanity's destiny. Approximately 60 millennia in the past, a tiny party of anatomically modern humans at last departed Africa. It was not an entire populace, merely perhaps several hundred souls who navigated the slim strait separating the Horn of Africa from the Arabian Peninsula, searching for fresh lands by trailing, migrating herds, possibly escaping warfare or dry conditions. They remained oblivious to the fact that they would soon meet relatives they had never imagined. For more than 400,000 years, 3 distinct human lineages had been developing entirely apart from one another. Modern humans stayed in Africa, cultivating the mental adaptability and inventive skills that would come to define them. Neanderthals refined methods for enduring Europe's icy ages, evolving into robust, formidable predators suited for harsh frost. Meanwhile, the enigmatic Denisovans, still largely a mystery to us, dispersed throughout Asia, adjusting to climates ranging from warm archipelagos to lofty tablelands. At last, after the division following the population bottleneck, these evolutionary relatives were poised to meet directly. The initial contact likely occurred in the Levant, the area that we currently know as the Middle East. As modern humans advanced northward out of Africa, they would have met Neanderthals at the southern limit of that species' territory, perhaps near present-day Israel or Lebanon. Excavations indicate that both types of humans inhabited the same caverns, sometimes with gaps of just a few millennia, sometimes during the same period. Picture that instant. You are a scout from a modern human group, investigating lands your tribe has never encountered. Your clan has journeyed for many days, trailing the shoreline, pursuing unknown creatures, and sampling unfamiliar vegetation. Then, one dawn, you spot smoke rising from a fire across a ravine. Other people. However, as you draw nearer, something seems off. They are undoubtedly human, yet distinct, more compact than your kin, but heavily muscular, with shoulders resembling massive rocks and protruding facial features. Their brow ridges are prominent, and their nostrils are wide enough to accommodate your thumb. Their complexion likely paler than yours, suited to weaker sunlight. Their hair could be red or blonde, hues you have never observed on any person until now. They wear basic animal skins, yet sewn with great skill. Their lances are stout and strong, meant for stabbing up close instead of being hurled. You are looking at Neanderthals, your evolutionary kin, separated for 400 millennia, yet unmistakably human. The events that followed are inscribed in our genetic code, and the narrative they reveal is far more intricate and captivating than anyone suspected until quite recently. In the year 2010, a research group headed by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute accomplished a remarkable feat. They decoded the complete Neanderthal genetic makeup from fossilized remains. Upon contrasting it with the DNA of present-day humans, they discovered an unforeseen truth. Every person with ancestry outside Africa possesses Neanderthal genes. Approximately 1 to 4% of our chromosomes contain this ancient inheritance. This serves as definite evidence that our forebears did not merely meet Neanderthals, they mated with them. This realization was groundbreaking. For many years, the dominant hypothesis was that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were distinct species that vied for resources but did not produce offspring together. The genetic information thoroughly demolished that old belief. Not only did interbreeding occur, but it happened repeatedly across dozens of millennia. The hereditary markers indicate a minimum of 3 significant waves of mixing, and likely more each time their territories overlapped. Yet the truly astonishing part is this: the crossbreeding proved fertile. The mixed descendants were not sterile, unlike mules. They were capable of procreation, and they transmitted Neanderthal genetic material through countless generations, down to the present era. Presently, Any individual with non-African lineage bears genetic variations that trace back to Neanderthal communities more than 50,000 years ago. Certain of these variations turned out to be beneficial. Neanderthals had inhabited Eurasia for hundreds of centuries, contending with illnesses and germs unknown to African populations. Through interbreeding with Neanderthals, modern humans gained immune-related genes that offered protection against indigenous ailments. Analysis of DNA reveals that numerous Neanderthal segments in today's humans are associated with immune responses. These provided our ancestors with a survival edge, effectively a fast-acting genetic vaccination against Eurasian illnesses that would otherwise have wreaked havoc on migrating groups. Additional Neanderthal genes influenced skin and hair traits. Modern humans originally developed in tropical Africa, where dark skin was optimal for strong solar radiation. In regions with reduced ultraviolet radiation, paler skin proved beneficial for generating vitamin D. Several of the genes that regulate skin and hair pigmentation in present-day Europeans originate from Neanderthals, who had already become suited to these surroundings. Yet the narrative grows even more intriguing when we examine the other human species that people met, the Denisovans. Among the human species known to science, the Denisovans remain one of the most enigmatic. In contrast to Neanderthals, who bequeathed countless fossils throughout Europe and West Asia, Denisovans are represented by only a scant number of skeletal pieces: a finger bone unearthed in Denisova cave located in Siberia, and a jawbone uncovered by a Tibetan monk. Scattered across Asia, just a handful of teeth and pieces of skull remain. With only those fossils, their existence would have remained almost unknown. However, when researchers pulled DNA from that finger bone, an entire vanished species came suddenly into the light. From the Denisovan genome, we learned they were a sibling group to Neanderthals, diverging from a shared ancestor around 400,000 years past. Yet, whereas Neanderthals remained in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans expanded across the whole of Asia, from Siberian regions down to Southeast Asia, from lofty plateaus all the way to tropical isles. Their success was remarkable, colonizing a wide variety of habitats and adapting to severe circumstances that even present-day humans would find challenging. And much as they did with Neanderthals, modern humans mated with them. Genetic proof indicates numerous meetings throughout Asia. As modern humans moved eastward from the Middle East roughly 50 millennia ago, they came across Denisovan groups and established bonds with them. Nowadays, many people across Asia carry Denisovan DNA, usually about 0.2% of their genome. However, certain groups possess significantly higher amounts. Contemporary Papuans and Aboriginal Australians have as much as 6% Denisovan heritage, the greatest proportion of ancient human DNA seen in any present-day population. This indicates that the mixing was not a singular event. It occurred over and over across various places spanning many millennia. As modern humans traveled through Southeast Asia, they met different Denisovan communities and interbred with every one of them. The genetic markers reveal at least 3 distinct Denisovan lines gave genetic material to modern humans. 3 separate groups, likely isolated from one another by vast distances and tens of millennia, meeting and mixing with our forebears. And many of those Denisovan genes conferred remarkable benefits for survival. The best-known instance is the EPAS, one gene version present in today's Tibetans and other populations living at high elevations. That gene influences the way the body handles oxygen. In high-altitude regions where oxygen is limited, the majority of individuals suffer from altitude sickness. Their blood becomes denser with additional red cells, putting pressure on the heart and leading to severe health issues. Yet individuals carrying the Denisovan EPAS-1 variant experience no such difficulty. Their systems manage oxygen more effectively, enabling them to inhabit heights that would disable others without discomfort. That gene originated directly with the Denisovans. Genetic studies indicate that the Denisovan group providing this version was residing on the Tibetan plateau likely for many hundreds of millennia, sufficient time for natural selection to produce this extraordinary trait. Upon arrival and interbreeding with these Denisovans, modern humans gained within one generation an adaptation that would otherwise have demanded hundreds of thousands of years of natural evolution. Additional Denisovan genes appear to have aided immunity in tropical settings, defense against particular parasites, and the processing of specific foods. Much like the Neanderthal genes, These were not mere genetic leftovers. These were proven, reliable survival traits that modern humans obtained via interbreeding. However, a troubling question lingers in this tale. If mixing was occurring, if bonds were being forged, if mixed offspring were born and flourished, then why did Neanderthals and Denisovans ultimately vanish? The explanation is not straightforward. It certainly wasn't a case of genocide. The genetic data would appear quite different had modern humans merely exterminated their evolutionary relatives. Instead, what we observe is a protracted, intricate sequence of contact, rivalry, and slow replacement that unfolded across tens of millennia. In the Middle East, the initial meeting area, dominance of the territory alternated many times. When climate shifted, Neanderthals would move southward into territories previously held by modern humans. Then circumstances would alter once more, and modern humans would spread north. Archaeological findings reveal that caves were inhabited successively by various species, occasionally with only a few hundred years separating their use. Neither group could achieve lasting supremacy until modern humans invented what archaeologists term the Upper Paleolithic toolkit, roughly 45,000 years in the past. This marked a technological upheaval. Advanced spear throwers capable of striking from 30 meters, bone needles enabling tailored, insulated garments for harsh cold, fishing hooks and nets unlocking new food resources from water, systematic blade manufacture producing lengthy, keen edges from very little stone. These were not merely improved tools, they were force amplifiers that entirely transformed the competitive balance. A Neanderthal hunting group had to approach prey closely with hefty thrusting spears, demanding immense strength and bravery. Perilous labor with elevated injury frequencies. In contrast, a band of modern humans using spear throwers could slay the same beast from a secure range, encountering less danger and requiring fewer individuals. As time passed, this advantage in efficiency grew ever larger. Territory management became possible for smaller groups, allowing them to oversee greater areas. With fewer mishaps during hunts, populations expanded at a quicker rate. Superior cold-weather garments enabled them to venture into territories that Neanderthals struggled to inhabit. Gradually, in a steady decline, the Neanderthal numbers started to dwindle. The initial loss was the richest hunting territories, those river valleys and coastal plains teeming with prey. After that, they were forced into less favorable areas, such as mountain valleys and dense northern woodlands. By 40,000 years in the past, groups of Neanderthals in Western Europe had broken into separate, isolated clusters. By 35,000 years ago, only a few scattered sanctuaries in southern Europe remained under their control. The final documented Neanderthals made their home in Gibraltar some 28,000 years ago. Stranded on a peninsula at the continent's southernmost tip, a tiny population hung on as their safe havens slowly shrank. And then, they vanished. There was no grand, bloody conflict that ended them instead. They were gradually outmatched, generation after generation, in the contest for resources. The planet was becoming increasingly populated by a species with more sophisticated technology. The tale of the Denisovans mirrored similar themes, yet unfolded in a distinct manner throughout Asia's immense and varied terrain. The continent's size and diversity allowed various human species to inhabit distinct ecological zones for extended stretches of time. Denisovans had adjusted to life in lofty mountain ranges and kept to those heights, while modern humans settled the lowlands. Some Denisovan groups, experts at navigating the seas, held on to their island territories. However, in time, the same demographic and technological forces that wiped out Neanderthals also overtook the Denisovans. Modern humans had the capacity to sustain much bigger populations within the same regions. They were quicker to invent, creating fresh technologies every couple of millennia. In contrast, the Denisovans, akin to Neanderthals, were more conservative in their approach to technology. Still, they could tap into a broader variety of food resources, which lessened their susceptibility to environmental shifts. Genetic findings point to the surprising longevity of certain Denisovan groups, persisting much later than expected. Evidence suggests that interbreeding occurred in Southeast Asia as recently as 25,000 years ago, well after Neanderthals had faded from Europe. However, piece by piece, Denisovan groups were assimilated through interbreeding, pushed aside by spreading modern humans, or merely died out once their populations shrank to unsustainable sizes. By 20,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was the sole human species still around. Yet it wasn't a completely solitary existence. Recent finds have painted an image far more intricate than previously understood. In 2003, archaeologists unearthed bones on the Indonesian island of Flores that defied classification within any recognized human species. Homo floresiensis, affectionately called the Hobbit, measured merely a meter in height and possessed a brain only a third the volume of contemporary humans. Nonetheless, they crafted advanced implements and hunted effectively until roughly 50,000 years back, precisely as modern humans entered that part of the world. In 2019, further enigmatic human remains came to light from cave sediments in the Philippines. Homo luzonensis, identified from just a few skeletal fragments, exhibited an odd combination of ancient and modern characteristics. Their curved finger bones indicate that they frequently climbed trees, yet they also produced stone implements and managed to inhabit an island that demanded sea voyages to access. Genetic data suggests there are yet more unidentified species. DNA studies of contemporary Asian groups reveal the presence of ghost lineages, genetic markers that correspond to no known human species. They could stem from Denisovan groups still undiscovered, or perhaps they are remnants of completely unknown species that intermixed with our forebears before fading away. All of this evidence leads to the realization that the human lineage during the later Pleistocene was much more branched and complex than anybody had ever envisioned. As recently as 2 decades ago, it was understood that when modern humans left Africa about 60,000 years ago, they stepped into a world brimming with other human species. Some of these we have identified and labeled. Others are known to us only through faint genetic signals, and still others likely remain undiscovered. Our ancestors met them, engaged with them, built connections with them, and occasionally produced offspring together. This was not a tale of conquest or genocide. It was a far more intricate affair, a blend of competition and collaboration, a mix of displacement and assimilation. It was a slow, extended progression in which one species, owing to its technological creativity, demographic edge, and adaptable behavior, gradually rose to dominance as the others dwindled away. Yet those other species did not vanish entirely. They persist within us. The Neanderthal DNA that gives your immune system a boost against illnesses. The Denisovan genes that enable Tibetans to thrive at high elevations. Mysterious genetic variants from species without names, concealed within our DNA, continue to function after tens of thousands of years. The puzzle of why modern humans thrived, while our relatives perished, returns us to the bottleneck concept. Each of the 3 post-bottleneck species, modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, received the same genetic equipment from those 280 survivors: intelligence, teamwork, technological ingenuity, and adaptability. All 3 species possess these qualities. However, modern humans held a key edge. The African group from which Homo sapiens emerged had endured continuous environmental upheaval long after the most severe phase of the bottleneck crisis had passed. Whereas Neanderthals became accustomed to the fairly consistent rhythms of Europe during the Ice Age, and Denisovans tailored themselves to particular Asian habitats, modern humans were shaped by evolution to be supremely adaptable. Recurring climate changes, erratic rain patterns, and animal populations that came and went. This maintained a flexible evolutionary path for African populations, never becoming trapped in fixed specializations. When the 3 species eventually crossed paths, the Neanderthals and Denisovans resembled finely tuned instruments, extremely efficient in the right circumstances, yet challenging to repurpose. Our species, Homo sapiens, was akin to a versatile multi-tool, not flawlessly designed for any one job, but able to meet any obstacle that surfaced. This adaptability manifested in every aspect: ever-evolving technology and social networks with the capacity to expand quickly when necessary. Demographic trends also supported more rapid population increase. Sophisticated communication allowed the coordination of bigger communities over larger spans, while versatile diets made it nearly impossible to starve modern humans. The meetings between our ancestors and their archaic relatives were not foreordained triumphs. For millennia, the result hung in the balance. The Neanderthals possessed greater strength, were perfectly suited to frigid climates and had thrived through ice age conditions for more than 200,000 years. The Denisovans commanded huge domains and boasted their own complex adaptations. Each group had the potential to prevail in the contest, yet ultimately, behavioral flexibility overcame physical specialization. Quick innovation outpaced technological stagnation. The species most capable of adjusting to any circumstance slowly supplanted those exquisitely tailored to particular niches. By 15,000 years ago, the era of diverse human species had ended. Only our kind endured, bearing traces of DNA from our lost relatives, expanding to all reaches of the globe. Those early meetings had sealed our destiny. The key had been inscribed within our genetic code 900,000 years earlier, when a small group of survivors surfaced from humanity's most severe catastrophe, bearing the traits that would later enable their descendants to claim the world. When our modern ancestors departed Africa roughly 60,000 years ago, they did not merely drift randomly into unfamiliar lands. Instead, they claimed it gradually, one generation at a time, adjusting to habitats beyond anything their forebears could have envisioned. The pace of their expansion is truly astonishing. The first significant halt was the Middle East. Digs such as Skul and Kafze in present-day Israel reveal that our species had settled there by at least 50,000 years ago, perhaps even sooner. These were no mere temporary shelters. These were genuine communities, locations where families resided for many generations, nurtured children, and interred their departed with tenderness and ritual. The Middle East back then was quite welcoming, in fact. A mild climate, plentiful wildlife, and easy reach to both coastal Mediterranean and interior resources made it an ideal launching point. Here, migrants from Africa could halt, increase their numbers, and ready themselves for the next wave of movement. Yet they didn't simply take a break. They were adjusting, absorbing knowledge, and inventing. The archaeological evidence reveals something intriguing. These initial communities of the Middle East were already crafting innovations their African forebears had not required. Advanced projectile arms to bring down bigger game, improved methods for preparing plant foods native to temperate zones not found in Africa, and crucially, they were learning to produce garments. That may not seem groundbreaking, but consider the implications. In Africa, clothing is not truly essential. Perhaps a simple layer for protection or adornment, but not for warmth. The Middle East experiences winters where temperatures drop below freezing, making bare skin a serious risk. Consequently, they mastered sewing. Excavations from that era reveal bone needles, meticulously fashioned with minute openings for guiding sinew through hide and fur. This represents advanced clothing construction, deliberate production of close-fitting attire capable of preserving warmth in environments that would claim the life of an exposed person within hours. And those abilities would prove essential, as some of them were soon to venture northward into climates that made Middle Eastern winters seem almost balmy. Approximately 45,000 years ago, our modern human ancestors started moving into Europe. But this was Europe at the height of the last glacial period, not the lush, wooded region we recognize today. The terrain was chiefly tundra and steppe, with enormous ice sheets blanketing Scandinavia and extending southward into modern-day Germany and Poland. Winters endured for 8 months or longer. Summers were short, fierce, and erratic. This land belonged to the Neanderthals. And recall, the Neanderthals had inhabited these regions for hundreds of millennia. They were familiar with every cavern, each migratory path of every game animal, and every spot where flint could be excavated and water located during the icy months. They were the sovereigns of glacial Europe. Yet, in only a few thousand years, modern humans had not merely settled there. They had forged something unprecedented, which archaeologists refer to as the Aurignacian culture. The Aurignacian sites are completely different from earlier finds. We are discussing the earliest masterful artistry in Europe. The cave art at Chauvet in France, dating back roughly 37,000 years, depicts horses, lions, and rhinoceroses with remarkable precision and creative talent. These were not rough scribbles. They were deliberate arrangements, crafted works that demanded several sittings, platforms to access elevated cavern ceilings, and crucially, spare time. Artistic creation is impossible when one is struggling to exist. Art comes into being when a community has grown sufficiently skilled at fulfilling its essential requirements, freeing up moments and effort for creative representation. The Ornatian people did more than simply endure the harshness of Ice Age Europe. They flourished. Their tools were groundbreaking. Their blade-making techniques outstripped anything the Neanderthals had ever created. Tools fashioned from bone and antler were shaped into specialized instruments for particular jobs. Spear throwers' mechanisms capable of hurling projectiles with 3 times the power of a spear cast by hand were the equivalent of military-grade arms in the Stone Age. Yet the most remarkable adjustments were to the body itself. The human form was transforming to meet the demands of its new surroundings. We can follow these transformations in the bones and genetic clues that remain. Skin coloration underwent a profound shift. In Africa, dark skin shields against strong ultraviolet rays, which is vital for warding off skin cancer and safeguarding folate, a nutrient critical for reproduction. But in northern regions, particularly under the dim light of an ice age, dark skin turns into a disadvantage. Ultraviolet radiation must reach the skin to generate vitamin D. Without enough vitamin D, rickets, brittle bones, and numerous other health issues arise, lowering the chances of survival and reproduction. So natural selection began to favor fairer skin, though this change didn't happen overnight. Evolution moves at a slow pace, but across many hundreds of generations, the peoples of Europe gradually lightened, as those carrying the genetic code for lighter skin raised more children who lived to pass on their traits. Around 20,000 years ago, the inhabitants of Ice Age Europe likely possessed complexions akin to today's Northern Europeans. Their bodily dimensions also evolved. The long, lean frame that works so well for releasing heat in Africa turns into a liability when faced with intense cold. A more compact form with shorter arms and legs is preferable because it cuts down the surface area compared to volume. Reduced surface area leads to less heat escaping, meaning natural selection encouraged a sturdier physique among northern groups. This pattern is visible in their bones. The early modern humans in Europe display increasingly shorter and heavier frames the more time they spent in chilly environments. They were not as stocky as Neanderthals, yet they were certainly more compact than their African forebears. There were also adjustments in metabolism that we can only identify by studying their DNA. Variants influencing how the body handled fats proved essential for thriving on a diet rich in protein and fat, derived mainly from big game. Genetic changes for tolerating cold and managing energy, along with adjustments in immune genes to combat unfamiliar diseases in Eurasia, all took place. The human body was being reshaped by natural selection to fit its new surroundings. Yet cultural developments were proceeding even quicker than biological ones. Building shelter grew essential. In Africa, one could rest under a tree or in a basic lean-to for much of the year. But in Ice Age Europe, insufficient shelter was fatal. Consequently, they erected intricate homes, huts constructed from mammoth bones, employing the huge skulls and long bones as framework, then covering them with skins and sod for warmth. Partly underground pit houses were excavated into the earth to provide thermal mass and shielding from the wind. Certain sites reveal hearths that were cleverly constructed to keep heat in while reducing smoke. These were far from simple camping spots. They were carefully engineered buildings demanding foresight, teamwork, and skills handed down over countless generations. Meanwhile, other bands were moving eastward through Asia. This presented an entirely distinct set of adaptation hurdles. The spread across Asia took 2 primary paths. Some migrated north through Central Asia, tracing waterways such as the Ob River into Siberia. Others journeyed south and east, following coastlines via India and Southeast Asia, eventually reaching Indonesia and lands beyond. The coastal path probably presented fewer difficulties, at least to begin with. Shorelines offered steady supplies: shellfish, fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. One could keep heading eastward along the beach, never venturing far from provisions and fresh water. Archaeological findings indicate that these coastal wanderers advanced swiftly from the Middle East to Southeast Asia in perhaps 10 millennia. That means moving 8,000 meters over 400 generations. It was neither a relaxed walk nor a panicked dash, but a steady, ongoing spread. Every generation pressed onward a bit more, founding new homes, dispatching scouting groups that occasionally set up fresh settlements and occasionally came back with news of what was beyond. Yet this trek demanded its own set of adjustments. Unfamiliar illnesses, parasites, and foodstuffs. The tropical climate of Southeast Asia was a world away from Ice Age Europe. Scorching heat and humidity replaced bitter cold. Thick jungles took the place of open tundra. Entirely different creatures roamed. Thus, body forms took a different path here, preserving the tall, lean frames that were good for cooling off, building immunity to tropical ailments, growing accustomed to meals rich in starchy plants and seafood instead of big game, and they were inventing novel technologies. Clues point to these Southeast Asian communities mastering complex boat-building techniques much sooner than their relatives in Europe. Many islands in Indonesia and the Philippines cannot be stumbled upon by chance. Vessels suited for open-sea journeys, carefully organized voyages, and navigation methods that allowed them to come back home were essential. Certain scholars believe these coastal groups created the earliest genuine maritime societies. People who devoted equal time to water and land, communities whose whole way of life revolved around the sea's bounty. The northern passage across Central Asia was tougher, with chillier weather and more uncertain supplies. Yet those who followed this route would later become the forebears of the Native Americans. These were the people who traversed the Bering Land Bridge into a whole new hemisphere. We'll come to that tale later. For now, the crucial point is that they endured circumstances nearly as severe as Ice Age Europe, all while retaining their capacity to press eastward. And then there is the Ishim individual, one of the most significant fossil finds in human evolution, unearthed in western Siberia and dating back roughly 45,000 years. From just one thigh bone, the DNA locked inside reveals an extraordinary tale. This individual, confirmed to be male through genetic testing, existed at the dawn of the Eurasian expansion. His genetic code indicates a closer kinship with both ancient Europeans and ancient Asians than those two groups share with one another. This implies he existed before these populations completely separated. He embodies an era when the spreading modern human groups had not yet divided into unique regional clusters. Yet consider this marvel. He was already settled in western Siberia 45,000 years ago, merely a few millennia after modern humans first departed Africa. The swiftness of this expansion is truly astonishing. His forebears departed tropical Africa, journeyed through the Middle East, and advanced far into one of the most frigid inhabited areas on the planet, within perhaps 200 generations. The Ishim man was no desperate pioneer, merely clinging to existence. His skeletal remains indicate he was robust and well-fed. His genetic makeup includes approximately 2% Neanderthal heritage, similar to that of present-day non-Africans. However, his Neanderthal DNA segments are extended compared to those found in modern groups. This indicates to genetic researchers that his Neanderthal lineage is more recent than our own. He existed nearer to the actual episodes of interbreeding, capturing a vivid moment of human evolution. Neither purely African nor entirely suited to Eurasian surroundings, this individual hovered between realms, bearing the genetic inheritance of several species. He was adapting in real time to one of the most extreme habitats humans ever dared to occupy. Moving westward, the Kosteni archaeological sites in Russia reveal another vital chapter of this narrative. A series of archaeological locations alongside the Don River, inhabited multiple times, from 45,000 to 30,000 years ago. These stand among the most ancient modern human settlements in Europe, not on the periphery of the Middle East, but far within the continent's interior. The remarkable aspect of Kosteni is the refined nature of the artifacts discovered. Imagine structures stretching 65 feet in length, constructed from mammoth bones and timber, with several fireplaces indicating shared living quarters. Storage pits held thousands of stone tools, evidence of careful long-term planning and resourcefulness. Ornaments crafted from shells originated from the Black Sea, a distance of 300 miles. Evidence of a trade network spanning immense distances. The inhabitants of Kosteni were not merely getting by. They had established a secure and thriving community under circumstances that would test even modern humans with today's tools. They accomplished this using only stone implements, garments made from animal skins, and wisdom transmitted verbally across generations. Yet the greatest challenge soon arrived. Some 26,000 years ago, the environment worsened yet again. The last glacial maximum, the iciest, most arid phase of the entire Ice Age, saw global temperatures fall 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit lower than today's. Glaciers crept over Europe and Asia, blanketing lands that humans had occupied for millennia. Ocean levels descended by 400 feet as water became trapped in ice layers. Great Britain merged with the European mainland. Indonesia was connected to the Asian continent. One could have journeyed from France to Ireland without crossing water. For early human groups, this was a catastrophe nearly as severe as the ancient bottleneck, less abrupt and less absolute, but still ruinous. Vast regions that once sustained human life turned into wastelands. Populations were compelled to move south into sanctuary areas: Spain, southern France, the Black Sea coast, and Southeast Asia. Societies that had flourished and spread for 20,000 years were abruptly confined to ever-diminishing lands, yet they endured because the cultural and biological adaptations cultivated over time proved invaluable during this emergency. The garment techniques honed over millennia enabled them to withstand cold that could fatally harm an unprotected person within minutes. They wore layered outfits of fur and hide, stitched together with tendon thread using bone needles, along with insulated boots and head protection. Such advanced winter attire would not seem odd on a present-day Arctic journey. Their mastery of shelter construction allowed them to create homes that held warmth, even as outside temperatures plunged to negative 40 degrees. Fireplace designs channeled heat effectively and removed smoke successfully. Partially sunken structures used the ground as natural insulation. The techniques they devised for storing and preserving food, employing permafrost as natural refrigeration, drying and smoking meat, and treating plant foods to prolong their usefulness, allowed them to endure extended winters when hunting became nearly fruitless and vegetation was wholly absent. Above all, the social connections they established were crucial. In the peak of the Ice Age, enduring was not a matter of solitary families struggling alone. Instead, it involved mutual support among communities and trade webs that distributed supplies when local circumstances faltered. Information traveled between groups about remaining game locations and water sources. Additionally, they exchanged insights on modifying methods effective in one sanctuary area to suit the environment of another. Genetic data from this era reveals a remarkable fact. Even when confined to refuge zones, and despite population declines that could have cut overall numbers by 60 to 70%, humans retained genetic variety more than anticipated. This indicates that social networks remained operational. Groups that could have become isolated did not. Individuals traveled between refuge areas, keeping in touch and swapping marriage partners. The earlier bottleneck, 900,000 years ago, had imparted a valuable lesson regarding the perils of isolation. Those who endured that earlier catastrophe were the ones capable of cooperation and the sharing of wisdom and supplies. That knowledge, embedded in cultural memory, if not in genes, continued to shape human conduct many millennia later. By 19,000 years ago, the harshest period had ended. The climate started to warm. As the glaciers melted, the sea level rose. Human communities that had taken shelter in refuges began to grow and spread once more. They returned to abandoned areas and explored new territories. When they emerged from the glacial maximum, they were fundamentally transformed. Technological advancements emerged. Superior tools, clothing, and social structures. These innovations didn't vanish when conditions improved. Instead, they became essential elements of the human repertoire. Physical and cultural adaptations allowed humans to thrive in any setting. The stage was ready for the final wave of human expansion, settling continents and shifting from foraging to farming. But we're getting ahead of the narrative. There remains a tale about how humans reached isolated places. Pacific islands demanded advanced navigational skills. The Americas were devoid of human inhabitants, awaiting discovery. Even forbidding deserts and lofty peaks seemed entirely unlivable. The voyage from glacial refuges to every corner of the globe is what follows next. And it is just as astonishing as the Ice Age adaptation. Europe and tropical Asia because human adaptation was far from complete. Not by any means. While modern humans encountered Neanderthals in the Middle East and Denisovans in Asia. Certain groups pushed even farther. Unwilling to settle for colonizing familiar habitats, they were on the verge of attempting something never before seen in Earth's history. They would cross the open sea. About 65,000 years ago, possibly as early as 70,000, a handful of modern humans stood on Southeast Asian shores, gazing across the water toward a land no human had ever seen: Australia. Even during the Ice Age, when sea levels were much lower and many landmasses were linked, Australia remained isolated. No land bridge existed, no continuous shoreline to follow. Reaching it demanded crossing at least 60 miles of open ocean, perhaps more, depending on the route. This was not something you could happen upon by chance. You couldn't simply wade too far and end up on a new continent. These people had to intentionally construct watercraft capable of enduring ocean voyages. They had to carry enough food and water to last days, maybe weeks. They had to navigate using only the sun, stars, and an understanding of wind and currents that must have taken generations to acquire. And they had to undertake this journey knowing they might never come back. That's what truly strikes you when you deeply consider what they were attempting. This was exploration in the modern sense, sending ships out and bringing them back to report discoveries. The boats they built from bamboo, logs, or animal hides were not designed for return trips. These were one-way journeys. Once you left Southeast Asia and reached Australia, you were there permanently. You and your descendants would have to survive in a completely unfamiliar environment, with only the tools and knowledge you brought along. Why would anyone take such a risk? We may never know for sure, but the genetic bottleneck offers some hints. Those 117,000 years of near extinction had selected for something remarkable in human populations: a readiness, perhaps even a drive, to explore, to push limits, to discover what lay beyond the horizon. The populations that survived the bottleneck were not those that stayed safely in familiar territories. They were the risk-takers, the innovators, the groups willing to try new food sources, new lands, and new survival strategies when old ones failed. That genetic heritage was still influencing human behavior 800,000 years later. So they built their boats and set sail. Archaeological evidence from Australia confirms they succeeded. Multiple sites across the continent show human occupation dating back at least 65,000 years, possibly earlier. These were not merely coastal settlements either. Within a few thousand years of arrival, humans had spread across the entire continent, from the tropical north to the temperate south, from coastal regions to the arid interior. This was an environment unlike any they had ever known. Australia's megafauna, giant animals that had evolved in isolation for millions of years, had never encountered human hunters before. Kangaroos the size of horses, wombats as big as cars, massive flightless birds called ginormous, land-dwelling crocodiles, and marsupial lions with jaws like bolt cutters, powerful enough to crush bone. All were completely unaware of the hunting strategies modern humans had perfected over hundreds of thousands of years. The newcomers also brought something Australia had never experienced: fire used systematically as a tool for shaping the landscape. Aboriginal Australians developed what archaeologists call fire stick farming, intentionally burning vegetation to create hunting grounds and encourage the growth of useful plants. This was not random destruction. It was sophisticated environmental engineering based on a deep understanding of Australian ecology. But it had consequences. Within about 10,000 years of human arrival, most of Australia's megafauna went extinct. The debate over why still rages among scientists. Was it hunting, climate change, habitat disruption from fire stick farming? Probably all three, compounding each other. But the timing is hard to ignore. Across countless millennia, these creatures endured shifts in climate, periods of drought, and devastating floods. But with the arrival of humanity, they vanished in the blink of a geological eye. Yet the Aboriginal Australians did not fade away. Instead, they flourished. Cut off from Asian and other groups, they forged a culture that stands among the most enduring in all of humanity. By Eurasian measures, their technological gear was quite basic, but that simplicity was a sign of perfection rather than limitation. Their survival methods were exquisitely tuned to Australia's environment. Elaborate kinship networks structured social ties over immense distances. Songlines, mental cartographies, woven into oral storytelling, enabled navigation across vast, seemingly empty landscapes. They spoke more than 250 different languages and upheld knowledge traditions that carried detailed ecological wisdom across thousands of years. All that emerged from just a few hundred brave souls who risked crossing open sea to an uncharted continent. Yet their exploratory spirit was far from satisfied. At roughly the same period as the colonization of Australia, other bands were venturing northward and eastward into the Pacific Ocean. This venture was bolder still than the journey to Australia. The Pacific is immense, so staggeringly large that it could swallow 36 Africas within its waters. Strewn across this vast watery realm are tens of thousands of islands, the majority mere dots of land, each isolated by hundreds or thousands of miles of open sea. The first inhabitants of the Pacific were not aiming for particular destinations. They had no knowledge of those places. Instead, they island hopped, slowly moving away from Asia, settling ever more distant islands. Every successful crossing demanded advanced seafaring skills. They built twin-hulled vessels capable of transporting humans, provisions, and breeding pairs of animals and crops. Their navigators read wave patterns, tracked birds, and studied the stars to locate islands hidden over the horizon. Their societies could organize voyages that involved many individuals and months of groundwork. Beyond that, they needed a nearly unimaginable appetite for danger. Today's computer models have attempted to estimate the likelihood of reaching far-flung Pacific islands with ancient navigation methods. The findings are sobering. Countless journeys likely ended in failure. Canoes would veer off course by miles, drifting into boundless sea until all aboard perished from dehydration. Others were overwhelmed by storms or dashed against coral reefs, yet a few triumphed, and that was sufficient. By 50,000 years ago, humans had arrived in New Guinea. By 30,000 years ago, they had populated the Bismarck Archipelago and the Solomon Islands. Those early voyagers met and mixed with Denisovans already present in the area, explaining why today's Pacific Islanders possess the greatest proportions of Denisovan ancestry, as high as 6% in certain groups. The colonization of the distant Pacific stretched on for tens of millennia. Fiji saw human footsteps around 3,500 years ago. Hawaii followed about 1,500 years ago. New Zealand, the final large landmass to be permanently inhabited by humans, was settled just 800 years ago. Every successful expedition was a victory of human cleverness, bravery, and that same unyielding urge to explore that had been honed during the population bottleneck. As certain groups mastered Pacific navigation, others were gearing up to enter a wholly different hemisphere, the Americas. No human had ever set foot in the Western Hemisphere. For more than 3 million years, as our ancestors evolved in Africa and dispersed through Europe and Asia, the Americas evolved their own distinct ecosystems in total seclusion. Reaching the Americas meant traveling from Asia into Alaska, a straightforward idea, but for the Bering Strait that separates them. Today it's a chilly, turbulent stretch of sea about 50 miles wide. However, during the Ice Age, when immense volumes of water were frozen in glaciers, sea levels fell by more than 300 feet. The Bering Strait transformed into the Bering Land Bridge, an extensive plain of grass and tundra linking Siberia with Alaska. This became the focal point in classic theories of how the Americas were settled. These migrants pursued Ice Age megafauna mastodons, giant bison, saber-toothed cats, across the land bridge, and then southward through an ice-free corridor nestled between the colossal glaciers that blanketed Canada. The chronology seemed tidy. The crossing occurred roughly 13,000 years ago. The migrants swept swiftly southward. Within a few millennia, people had made it to the southernmost point of South America, but the evidence persistently challenges this neat story. Over the last several decades, archaeological digs throughout the Americas have uncovered signs of much earlier human presence. This is older, at times far older than what the conventional model permits. At Monteverde in Chile, evidence indicates human presence dating back to at least 14,500 years, perhaps even 18,500. That presents a particular challenge because Chile lies some 10,000 meters from Alaska, If inhabitants were there 18,500 years ago, they must have made their way into the Americas considerably earlier. Additional locations across Mexico, Brazil, and the United States extend these timelines even deeper into the past. Certain scholars contend that humans were in the Americas as early as 30,000 years ago or beyond. Every fresh discovery sparks intense controversy. The reliability of dating techniques is often called into doubt. Artifacts undergo careful examination. Alternative theories are put forward, yet the accumulated evidence steadily grows. It points to a conclusion that would have appeared startling just 2 decades ago. There were multiple migratory waves, various routes, including coastal paths, not solely inland passages. Consider how certain groups could have traveled by water, keeping close to the Pacific shoreline from Asia across Alaska, then down the western coasts of North and South America. That would account for the surprisingly rapid appearance of humans at South American sites. They weren't trekking 10,000 meters across unfamiliar land. These people followed coastal contours, employing seafaring abilities honed through island hopping across the Pacific. Genetic evidence corroborates this intricate picture. Native American populations reveal connections to diverse ancestral groups from Asia. Certain genetic lines tie back to northern Siberian communities. Others display surprising affinities with peoples from southern Asia and even Australia. The data suggests at least 4 distinct migration episodes, perhaps additional ones, each introducing individuals with varied genetic heritages and cultural practices. What each of these newcomers encountered upon arrival was an untouched paradise. The Americas had never known human predation. Mammoths, mastodons, colossal ground sloths, beavers as large as bears, horses, camels, all had evolved without any instinctive fear of human hunting tactics. From this era, archaeological remains attest to remarkably effective hunting. Several mammoths were taken at individual spots, processing areas where whole herds were butchered. As had happened in Australia, the megafauna did not persist long after human arrival. Roughly 13,000 to 10,000 years ago, North America saw the disappearance of approximately 70% of its large mammal species. In South America, that figure was around 80%. Mammoths, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, dire wolves, dozens of species that had flourished for millions of years, all vanished within a few millennia after humans appeared. Once more, the controversy continues. Climate shifts were occurring at the same time. The Ice Age was drawing to a close. Temperatures climbed, habitats transformed. Yet the connection between human presence and megafauna extinction remains compelling. This pattern occurred in Australia. It repeated in the Americas. Later, it would play out in Madagascar and New Zealand. Everywhere humans first set foot, large, unsuspecting animals quickly vanished. This was not due to early humans being especially destructive or lacking foresight. They were simply acting as evolution had shaped them during the bottleneck. Use resources effectively, adapt swiftly, survive at any expense. The issue was that these animals had no prior evolutionary encounter with human hunting methods. They had no learned fear. Before natural selection could have instilled defensive responses, it was already too late. Populations had become too diminutive, too scattered. The cascade of extinctions had already been set in motion. However, even as the megafauna faded, human numbers surged. The Americas provided immense territories with comparatively few inhabitants vying for them. Communities could disperse, claim expansive territories, and evolve unique cultures in comparative seclusion. In just a few millennia, people had adjusted to every climate the Western Hemisphere presented. On the Arctic tundra of northern Alaska and Canada, they fashioned advanced cold-weather technologies and hunting tactics aimed at seals, walruses, and whales. In the temperate forests of eastern North America, plentiful game and vegetation sustained expanding populations. Across the Great Plains, nomadic bands tracked enormous bison herds. In the southwestern deserts, inhabitants mastered the use of limited water and cultivated crops resilient to drought. In the tropical rainforests of Central and South America, communities comprehended the intricate ecology of one of the planet's most biodiverse regions. In the towering Andes, they acclimated to severe altitudes, rarefied air, and dramatic temperature fluctuations. Every habitat required distinct survival approaches, varied technologies, and differing social structures. And because the Americas are so expansive and communities so widely dispersed, these separate populations evolved in relative seclusion over millennia. Languages grew apart. When Europeans reached the Americas in the 1500s, Native Americans communicated in more than 100 distinct languages, belonging to dozens of unrelated language families. Technologies became specialized. Arctic inhabitants turned into expert hunters of marine mammals. Great Plains groups devised intricate methods for pursuing bison on foot, well before horses were reintroduced from Europe. Southwestern peoples became skilled farmers in challenging conditions. Amazonian communities nurtured thousands of beneficial plant species, cultivating what seemed like wild forest, but was actually a carefully tended landscape. Cultural diversity flourished. Certain bands continued as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Others established settled villages. Some constructed intricate hierarchical societies. Others preserved egalitarian groups. Spiritual beliefs, artistic expressions, social traditions all thrived in countless variations, yet they all possessed a common, essential thread. Every one of them could trace their lineage back to those first pioneers who had ventured into a fresh continent. They all bore the genetic imprint of the survivors from the population crash. That particular fusion of chromosomes defined them as Homo sapiens. Their limited genetic variation arose from their descent from a minuscule group that had barely avoided vanishing. The mental abilities that allowed them to adapt had been honed over 117 millennia of hardship, and each of them possessed an innate urge to discover, to adjust, to endure in any landscape they faced. From the frozen north to the southern tip of South America, from the shores of the Pacific to the islands of the Caribbean, human communities had shown they could prosper in every corner of the globe. They had the ability to change their tools, their food sources, and their community structures, whatever was necessary to thrive in unfamiliar surroundings. By the time 10,000 years had passed, modern humans had accomplished a feat never before seen in the story of complex organisms on this planet. They had settled on every landmass save for Antarctica. They had grown accustomed to all of Earth's primary habitats. Whether it was lush tropical jungles or icy plains, swampy coastlines or windswept mountain highlands, mild grassy plains or dry, barren deserts, they had managed it all. They had voyaged across seas. They had climbed peaks, journeyed through sandy wastes. They had met their ancient relatives and outlived them. And they achieved all of this in under 60 millennia. For comparison, the expansion of their forebears across Africa required millions of years. Earlier types of humans required hundreds of thousands of years to populate Europe and Asia. Yet Homo sapiens, forged by that population crunch, had traversed the earth in a mere sliver of that duration. It wasn't that they were physically stronger or faster in an obvious sense. Rather, they had been molded by the brink of disappearance into a creature of extraordinary flexibility. They could devise fresh tools and methods swiftly whenever conditions shifted. They could adjust their societal arrangements to meet novel difficulties. They could absorb knowledge from one another and from the world around them. Whenever they faced a barrier, be it a vast sea, a frozen wilderness, or an uncharted desert, they could find a means to traverse it. The planet was becoming crowded with people. Now there were millions, conversing in hundreds of different tongues, following thousands of unique ways of life. Yet every one of those peoples, from the indigenous Australians to the inhabitants of Pacific Islands, from the first Americans to the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Europe, all could follow their family tree back through that same constricted passage. Each bore the genetic mark of those 180 individuals who had clung to life when hope appeared lost. The most remarkable migration in all of human history was drawing to a close, and the planet would be transformed permanently. So now, let's consider what existence truly felt like in those times. Not the epic tales of continental spread and inventions, but the ordinary experience of being a person 40 millennia in the past. What food did you consume? How did you keep yourself from freezing? What dangers ended your life? And what gave existence its meaning? The reality is, people of the Ice Age did more than merely endure. They constructed meaningful lives, nurtured families, produced beautiful art, shared tales, and shared laughter by the hearth. They were completely human in all the aspects that count. and learning about their day-to-day lives reveals far more about ourselves than any quantity of DNA testing ever might. Let's begin with nourishment, since the entirety of Ice Age existence centered on obtaining sufficient energy to stay alive. The humans, who traversed the Eurasian landmass during the glaciation, were stepping into a realm of astounding plenty, provided you understood how to harvest it. This was not the impoverished, natural world that later generations would encounter. This was the golden age of megafauna. The continents of Europe and Asia teemed with animals that we would consider mythical in the modern era. Mammoths with thick fur, towering 13 feet at the shoulder, enormous ground sloths. Cave bears exceeding a ton in weight, woolly rhinos, gigantic elk whose antlers stretched 12 feet across. Huge herds of wild horses, bison, and caribou were so immense that during their seasonal movements they cast a shadow over the terrain. To the people of the Ice Age, these creatures were far more than mere prey. They were mobile treasure chests. A lone mammoth could yield multiple tons of flesh, sufficient to sustain a group of 30 individuals for many months, if properly stored. The skin could serve as material for building shelters or crafting insulated garments. The bones were transformed into implements, frame poles for dwellings, and fuel for flames in times when timber was not available. The fat could be melted down into oil for lamps, illuminating caverns throughout the long, dark winter evenings. The sinews were turned into rope that surpassed the strength of any vegetable fiber. However, bringing down a mammoth was no easy task. These beasts were clever and perilous, capable of ending a person's life with just one strike. Such a hunt demanded careful preparation, teamwork, and advanced strategies that reveal a great deal about how Ice Age societies were structured. Archaeological digs throughout Europe have uncovered signs of organized hunting methods that would impress even contemporary military strategists. Bands would track mammoth wanderings over several days, studying their routines and picking out those that were weaker. Old creatures or young ones that had strayed from their family group became the favored quarry. After that, they would arrange the ambush site. At times, this involved steering the beasts towards precipices or into dead-end ravines from which there was no exit. Other excavation sites reveal traces of hidden pits, concealed with foliage, meant to trap huge creatures so that the hunters could finish them without risk. To bring down the mammoth, a team of hunters had to work together flawlessly. A few would creep in from the direction the wind was blowing, keeping out of sight until the perfect instant. Meanwhile, others would take up positions. Along the paths, the beast might flee. Once all were set, they would strike at once. Spears flew from different directions, their motions synchronized to bewilder and exhaust the creature. Relentless assault until it succumbed to blood loss and fatigue. This was not mere scavenging. It was a form of combat with their quarry, demanding a degree of communication and social organization unique to humans. However, mammoth hunting was a gamble with big payoffs, and on an ordinary day, Ice Age people consumed far humbler meals. Digs at ancient settlements reveal a remarkably varied menu. Fish remains are abundant, showing that rivers and lakes offered a steady source of protein. And not only big fish, they captured all sorts, from salmon to eels, employing clever traps, nets, and hooks fashioned from bone. Piles of shells along old shores indicate huge numbers of mollusks, mussels, oysters, and clams were eaten. Today we tend to view shellfish as a luxury, yet for Ice Age folks, they represented dependable energy that was easy to harvest. A short stroll along the shore for a few hours could yield enough to feed a whole family for a day. Birds, eggs during nesting time, turtles, snakes, anything slow enough to catch was on the menu. The bone deposits at Ice Age digs look like modern Chinese markets. If it had meat, they found a way to eat it. Vegetable foods were equally important. Roots, tubers, nuts, berries, and wild grains mattered a great deal, particularly in the warmer seasons. The true talent lay not only in locating these items, but in understanding precisely when and where they would appear. Ice Age people accumulated an immense knowledge of their surroundings. They were aware of which slopes caught the first spring sunlight and therefore produced the earliest greens, and which caves remained above frost in winter, allowing edible fungi to grow. Their grasp of seasonal cycles was so acute that they could revisit exact spots annually at the perfect moment to gather specific foods. This wisdom traveled across generations, likely via tales and melodies that packed useful facts into easy-to-remember formats. Your grandmother wouldn't simply advise you to inspect the south-facing valley come early spring. She would recount the legend of Ancestor Carr, discovering vital roots there during the Great Hunger, turning it into a story you would recall and pass to your grandchildren. However, knowing where to find food did not mean gathering it was safe or simple. Ice Age people inhabited a realm where they were not always at the top of the food chain. Cave lions, bigger than today's African lions, prowled those same lands. Cave bears, huge and fierce, vied for places to den. Saber-toothed cats, albeit scarce in that era, still lurked in certain areas. Packs of dire wolves worked together in hunts, much as humans did. Every step beyond the safety of camp meant stepping into a perilous world, a setting where something could be stalking you. Bones from that time speak of harsh tales, skeletons etched with signs of predator assaults, traces of infections after animal bites, and wounds from hunting mishaps that never mended correctly. Existence during the Ice Age was perilous in manners we today can hardly conceive. That peril profoundly influenced how societies were structured. People lived in bands, extended family groups, usually containing from 25 to 50 members. This was no random figure. Bands with fewer than 25 members had difficulty carrying out tasks needing many hands, such as herding animals during a hunt or keeping fires burning continuously. Groups over 50 struggled to locate sufficient food in a single area and experienced growing interpersonal friction as too many individuals tried to live closely together. Inside these bands, each person had responsibilities, but those were less fixed than previously believed. The traditional notion that men were hunters and women were gatherers proves too simplistic. New archaeological studies of graves reveal both men and women interred with hunting tools. Bone stress markers from repeated spear throwing appear in both genders. In reality, the arrangement was far more adaptable. For big group hunts, anyone physically able joined in. For everyday foraging and chores, individuals pitched in as required. The division was not based solely on gender, but rather on ability, know-how, and urgent need. What truly mattered was working together. Ice Age bands endured thanks to mutual aid that extended well beyond immediate family bonds. They distributed food methodically, not only among close relatives, but throughout the whole band. Excavations reveal shared cooking spots where big game was butchered and portioned. This was not about being generous. It was a form of security. If I kill a deer today and share it, then tomorrow, when I return with nothing, someone else gives me a portion of their kill. Over the long run, all gain from this back-and-forth goodwill. They also worked together when it came to raising children. Childhood in the Ice Age was extended, likely similar in length to our own. Kids didn't become fully grown until their late teenage years. That means 15 years or more during which they used up resources without being able to fully give back. In a subsistence economy, no single family shouldered that responsibility by themselves. As a result, caring for children turned into a community affair. The whole band watched over and educated the young ones. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, and even unrelated adults all took part in bringing up the next generation. This forged exceptionally tight social connections. You were acquainted not only with your kin by blood, but you also knew every person in your band on a deep, personal level. There were shared memories stretching all the way back to childhood. You placed your life in the hands of these people because you had placed your trust in them throughout your whole life. However, bands were not cut off from one another. They created interlinked networks. Multiple times each year, various bands assembled at customary gathering spots, where rivers merged, at mountain passes, and along coastlines abundant with seasonal bounty. These get-togethers fulfilled several roles. They served as trade fairs where groups swapped goods and raw materials. For instance, coastal bands could exchange shells and fish oil for flint and furs from the interior. Bands from diverse regions would exchange knowledge about animal migrations, climatic shifts, and potential hazards. Crucially, these meetings also functioned as marriage markets. During the Ice Age, bands followed exogamy. marrying outside one's own close group. This was not merely a cultural choice. It was a genetic imperative. Bands were so small that without periodic genetic mixing, inbreeding would soon pose a serious threat. Consequently, these seasonal assemblies were the places where youths encountered possible mates from other bands, where pacts were forged between different groups, and where the social ties linking far-flung communities were upheld and strengthened. The archaeological proof of such gatherings is understated yet clear. There are sites revealing abrupt increases in population. There are areas where resources from hundreds of miles distant appear in the same place. There are locations that were employed again and again across millennia, evolving into long-standing assembly grounds. During these meetings, humans accomplished something that distinguished them from all other species on the planet. They made art. The Ice Age cave paintings of Europe rank among the eeriest and most powerful works ever produced by human hands. Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, animal depictions executed with such mastery and precision that they might have been created just yesterday rather than 30,000 years ago. Horses in the midst of a gallop, their muscles rendered with fluid, sweeping lines. Bison charge with heads down, expressing sheer strength through ochre and charcoal. Lions creep stealthily, mammoths appear in profile, as do rhinoceroses and bears. Yet these were not merely attractive images. They held a deeper significance. Modern analysis of where cave art is located demonstrates that it was not arbitrary. The paintings are found in particular acoustic spaces, chambers where sound echoes and reverberates. There is also proof of musical instruments, such as bone flutes, able to play intricate tunes. Hand outlines appear on the walls, often grouped in a way that implies collective involvement. The paintings are not placed solely in accessible spots. Many lie within deep cave networks that demand hours of crawling along perilous routes to reach. Archaeologists now believe these caves were hallowed grounds, locales where Ice Age people came to conduct ceremonies, share narratives, and connect with something beyond mere day-to-day existence. The paintings may have served as storytelling aids, providing visual cues while shamans recited the legends and histories of their communities. The acoustic qualities hint at singing or chanting, spiritual experiences that blended visual imagery with music and storytelling. The Venus statuettes discovered throughout Ice Age Europe and Asia back up this view. These tiny carved figures, typically showing women with emphasized sexual features, are not vulgar pornography. These are sacred artifacts. Many bear signs of having been transported over extended periods, their features polished, smooth from frequent handling. They turn up in burial grounds, and in what appear to be household altars. They likely symbolized fertility, life energy, and the endurance of the band through fruitful reproduction. Turning to burial practices, Ice Age humans interred their dead with a degree of care that implies sophisticated notions about death and possibly a life after. The earliest burials of modern humans reveal bodies arranged in particular positions, frequently lying on their sides as if asleep. Grave goods also appear, objects laid beside the dead for purposes we can only hypothesize about. Stone implements, ochre pigments, animal remains, and shell decorations. One celebrated burial, the Red Lady of Paviland, was actually a young man laid to rest 33,000 years ago. He was adorned with ivory ornaments and coated in red ochre. The accompanying grave goods indicate elevated social standing, perhaps a chief or a shaman. Certain graves contain traces of flower pollen, implying that bodies were covered with vegetation prior to interment. Others include children laid to rest with intricate grave goods, suggesting these were not merely cherished individuals, but members of communities who deemed them worthy of sacrificing precious resources. This reveals that Ice Age humans had cultivated symbolic thoughts regarding death. They imagined that the departed persisted in some manner. They thought that objects placed in graves would travel with or aid the deceased. They carried out ceremonies expressing sorrow, remembrance, and perhaps the expectation of being reunited. Psychologically, they were completely modern humans, not only in cranial capacity or tool-making, but in their intricate emotional and spiritual lives. Yet spiritual beliefs did not shield them from the grim realities of Ice Age death rates. Infant mortality was devastating when measured against contemporary figures. Bones from ancient times indicate that around 40% of children did not reach their 5th birthday. Illnesses we now protect against with vaccines back then meant certain death. Infections were swift and unstoppable. Stomach bugs from tainted food or water could drain a child of fluids within just a few days. During harsh winters, lung infections took a heavy toll. Adults had slightly better odds, but the difference was small. The typical lifespan was likely about 35 years. This wasn't because nobody could live beyond that many did, but because early deaths were so common that the average remained low. Mishaps while hunting, encounters with predators, and minor injuries that became infected and poisoned the blood. A fractured leg might lead to death if it failed to mend correctly. Tooth abscesses could travel through the bloodstream, triggering deadly blood poisoning. Injuries that would cause today's ER physicians to flinch. Bones that knitted poorly, causing lifelong impairments. Joint inflammation so intense that each motion likely brought pain. Wear on tooth surfaces, hints that mouths served as tools, gripping animal skins while scraping, grinding enamel away until bacteria invaded the inner pulp. Yet these remains also reveal kindness. People lived through wounds that ought to have killed them, implying that companions looked after them as they healed. In Iraq's Shanidar cave, a man managed years of life after losing function in one arm, his teeth, and likely an eye. He would have struggled to hunt or gather food on his own. His survival depended entirely on his group's care. They sustained him because he belonged, because his wisdom and experience mattered, even though his body was damaged. Traces of intergroup violence also appear. It wasn't unending war, but occasional skirmishes that left scars discoverable by archaeologists. Crania, bearing damage from blunt weapons, remains interred quickly, without ceremonial items, hinting at foes or casualties from attacks. Settlements charred and deserted without warning. Encampments, surrounded by protective trenches. Rivalry over supplies occasionally erupted into conflict when bands met in contested areas. Yet such fighting appears to have been unusual. The majority of archaeological sites display indications of exchange instead. Rather than conflict, genetic proof of mixing between different groups suggests that collaboration happened just as often as aggression, and working together demanded speech. This is the moment storytelling emerges. It was more than amusement. It was a tool as vital as stone, weapons, or flame. During the Ice Age, people existed in a society without written records. All their knowledge had to be committed to memory and shared by word of mouth. Where to find water, how herds of animals moved, which plants had healing powers, and the limits of friendly lands. All that information was woven into tales. Yet stories do more than simply pass on facts. They forge a sense of self. They unite communities with common accounts. Picture your group gathered by the fire in the evening, tired from the day's work, as the elders started reciting ancient narratives. You were part of a deep experience. You discovered your tribe's identity, your origins, the principles you should live by, and how to embody the humanity of those who came before you. These narratives likely blended useful skills with legend, hunting sagas that doubled as lessons in following tracks. Accounts of legendary forebears that contained details about land boundaries and alliances with other groups. Fables that clarified how the world worked while also instructing youngsters about risks and possibilities around them. Melodies went along with the tales. Those flutes made from bone were not limited to ceremonial caves. These were common tools that eased difficult labor and made festivities happier. Beats and tunes assisted coordination in group chores. It's likely that music accompanied almost all collective endeavors, from preparing animal skins, to crafting implements, to just traveling from one camp to another. And amid all these perils, struggles, sorrows, and aggression, Ice Age people accomplished something extraordinary. They embraced life completely. Their existence wasn't merely about staying alive. They knew happiness, affection, companionship, amazement. Gazing up at the stars filled them with wonder. Embracing their offspring stirred a powerful, guarding love. They grieved for those who passed and felt sorrow. They rejoiced after a good hunt and experienced pride and contentment. What remains from ancient times only hints at these inner worlds. Yet we are certain they were real because we ourselves feel those emotions now. For the people who adorned cave walls with paintings, sculpted Venus statues, and laid their dead to rest with blossoms were exactly like us in DNA, brain structure, and feelings. They merely existed in an era where mere survival called for wisdom, physical power, teamwork, and a resolve that very few people today could equal. In that world, one error could be fatal. Cold seasons were not mere annoyances, but deadly trials, and having enough to eat was never certain while threats lurked constantly. Yet, they did more than merely endure that world, they conquered it. They journeyed across vast continents, built families, crafted art, shared tales, and experienced the full range of human emotions: laughter, love, sorrow, and hope. These were our forebears, and every person living now bears the genetic mark of their triumph. The traits that allowed them to flourish in the Ice Age remain embedded in our genetic code. The social systems they created still underpin human societies. The artistic practices they first invented continue to move us. When you observe cave paintings in galleries or images, you aren't seeing the efforts of crude primitives, scarcely above beasts. You are witnessing the works of individuals every bit as human as yourself. They confronted a world far more daunting than any we know today, and they did not just endure, they produced beauty, sought meaning, and bequeathed an unbroken inheritance spanning 40,000 years. That is the true narrative of existence during the Ice Age. It is not merely about survival, but about being human fully, entirely, intricately human, expressed amid the harshest conditions conceivable. Every aspect of our present, our accomplishments, communities, and aspirations, sprouted from the seeds they sowed through those icy ages, when humanness carried a raw, direct, and deep significance we have nearly lost. Thus, we find ourselves today, 300,000 years since the emergence of modern humans, 70,000 years since our departure from Africa, 30,000 years since we became the sole surviving human species. 7 billion of us are spread over every continent, uttering 7,000 distinct tongues and embodying 10,000 unique expressions of humanity. How do those ancient travels relate to our present lives? Completely. Those movements did not simply disperse humans worldwide. They shaped our very essence, quite literally. The decisions our forebears took, the landscapes they encountered, the fellow humans they befriended and occasionally interbred with, all of this is inscribed in our bodies, minds, and DNA. Let us begin with the most apparent inheritance: your physical appearance. Your very appearance as you read these words is a direct outcome of your ancestors' journeys and their experiences upon arrival. Consider skin color. This is arguably the most noticeable human difference, and it stems entirely from those early migrations. While modern humans inhabited only Africa, their skin was dark. Abundant melanin offered protection from the powerful UV rays near the equator. This was not merely aesthetic. Excessive UV radiation depletes folate, an essential vitamin for reproduction and fetal growth. Dark skin was truly a survival necessity. However, when people moved northward into Europe and Asia, they faced an entirely distinct evolutionary force: diminished sunlight. Abruptly, dark skin turned into a liability. Melanin shields against UV, yet humans require some UV to synthesize vitamin D. In northern regions with sparse sunlight, particularly during extended winters, individuals with very dark skin were unable to generate adequate vitamin D. Insufficient vitamin D leads to rickets, a condition that warps bones and can render childbirth hazardous for women. Hence, natural selection promoted lighter skin among northern groups. Not right away. This process required thousands of generations, but over time, European and Northern Asian peoples developed notably lower melanin output. The genetic changes responsible for light skin are quite recent. Some spread broadly only in the past 10,000 years. Consequently, your skin tone represents one of the newest evolutionary adjustments in human history, and it serves as a direct chart of your ancestors' roots. Dark skin near the equator, light skin in northern regions, and intermediate tones in between. Your body displays a genetic atlas of ancient travels. Eye color follows a parallel pattern. Brown eyes are the original human characteristic. All of us possessed brown eyes in Africa, but groups that ventured into northern Europe acquired a mutation that lessens melanin production within the iris. Blue, green, and gray irises are all modern evolutionary innovations, likely emerging within the last 10 millennia. If your eyes are blue, Your forebears almost surely took part in the European movement, and that genetic change can be linked to a lone person who resided near the Black Sea. Hair texture serves as yet another indicator of migration. Tightly coiled hair, similar to dark skin, offers protection in warm climates. It forms an insulating cushion of air above the scalp that aids temperature control and shields from UV harm. Yet in chillier environments, this benefit vanishes. Northern populations evolved straighter strands, while those staying in tropical zones preserved the original curly texture. Once more, your hair narrates the tale of your ancestors' journeys. Body shapes reflect these identical trends. Recall how Neanderthals developed sturdy physiques for Ice Age Europe. Contemporary human groups exhibit analogous adjustments, albeit milder. Individuals whose ancestors resided in cold regions for millennia generally possess more compact frames, with limbs shorter compared to torso length. This is fundamental physics. Compact bodies possess smaller surface area relative to bulk, resulting in reduced heat dissipation. Groups in tropical areas exhibit the reverse tendency: taller, leaner builds with elongated limbs. Having a larger surface area allows for better cooling when sweating. The tallest and slimmest individuals on Earth are often found among East African groups that remained in their ancestral lands. Meanwhile, the most robust and compact builds are typical of Arctic peoples who moved to the harshest, coldest regions. These are far more than mere curious differences. They demonstrate that human evolution did not cease upon leaving Africa. For tens of thousands of years, we kept adapting to our new surroundings, and this process continues even now. Yet the deepest imprint of those ancient journeys remains unseen, hidden in our DNA through the patterns of genetic variation. These genetic patterns reveal tales of population bottlenecks, founder effects, and meetings with other ancient human species. What might astonish many is this: even though humans colonized every corner of the Earth and adapted to wildly diverse climates, we are strikingly similar at the genetic level. Our species shows far less genetic variation than most other creatures. Two individuals from opposite ends of the globe are genetically closer than two chimpanzees living in adjacent groups within the same jungle. This remarkable fact traces back to that ancient bottleneck, a near-extinction event that lasted around 117,000 years and wiped out the vast majority of human genetic diversity. As the population eventually rebounded and spread, every modern human descended from that small, resilient group. Our relatedness to one another is extraordinarily close. Yet here is where it becomes truly fascinating. The limited genetic diversity that does exist follows distinct geographic distributions, directly mirroring those prehistoric migrations. And these patterns reveal the precise routes humans took as they populated the world. Africa holds the greatest genetic diversity anywhere on Earth, particularly among communities that remain close to the areas where modern humans first emerged. The San people of southern Africa, for instance, possess more genetic variation within their own group than is found across the entire continents of Europe, Asia, and the Americas put together. This pattern is precisely what one would predict if modern humans first evolved in Africa and later sent out small migratory bands. The original homeland population kept the fullest range of genetic variation, while each emigrating group took only a fraction of that diversity, leading to what scientists term founder effects. Consider this analogy. Picture a jar filled with 10,000 marbles, each a different color. That jar represents the African population, the peak of genetic diversity. Then, you dip your hand in and pull out a small handful, say 100 marbles. That handful is your migrating group. Those 100 marbles cannot possibly capture all 10,000 colors. They are merely a sample, and simply by luck, they have lost most of the original variety. Now that tiny handful of 100 differently colored marbles becomes the founding population for an entirely new area. Every bit of genetic diversity in that new region originates solely from those 100 marbles. You can never exceed the variety you began with. Indeed, you will likely end up with even less, as certain colors are inevitably lost over time. This is precisely a founder effect, and it occurred over and over as humans spread across the globe. The genetic evidence matches this pattern exactly. Europeans exhibit lower genetic diversity than Middle Eastern groups. East Asian populations show roughly the same level of diversity as Europeans, though their particular genetic variations differ. Native Americans possess even less genetic diversity, which aligns with their origins from a tiny group that migrated from Asia into the Americas. Pacific Islanders demonstrate the most pronounced founder effects. Polynesian communities that voyaged to far-flung islands like Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand originated from extraordinarily small founding populations, sometimes numbering only several dozen people. As a result, their genetic variation is equally restricted. This has tangible implications in the present day. Some genetic disorders occur more frequently in specific populations, not due to any intrinsic characteristic of those groups, but because of long-term founder effects and the random changes of genetic drift over millennia. Grasping these genetic patterns assists medical scientists in crafting improved therapies and pinpointing genetic risk factors. Yet the most thrilling breakthroughs have emerged from the study of ancient DNA. Over the past 15 years, researchers have perfected methods to extract and decode DNA from bones that are tens of thousands of years old, and their findings have completely transformed our view of human history. Recall earlier when I mentioned that everyone with ancestry outside Africa carries roughly 2% Neanderthal DNA. That revelation came directly from analyzing ancient DNA. Researchers mapped out the complete Neanderthal genome and then compared it to that of present-day humans. The shared segments were undeniable. Our forebears had mated with Neanderthals and passed on their genetic material. But it grows even more captivating. Those Neanderthal gene variants are not distributed haphazardly. Instead, they are concentrated in regions of our genome that influence particular characteristics. Certain Neanderthal genes boost immune function. In fact, we directly inherited portions of our immune system from Neanderthals' pre-existing adaptations to European illnesses that would have otherwise required thousands of years for modern humans to develop resistance against. Further, Neanderthal genes influence skin and hair traits. Some of the genetic variations responsible for red hair and pale skin in Europeans were inherited from Neanderthals. Neanderthals had already developed these features to thrive in dimly lit environments. When modern humans reached Europe and intermingled with Neanderthals, we acquired these advantageous characteristics through interbreeding. Denisovan DNA appears in comparable patterns. East Asian groups possess modest traces of Denisovan genetic material, while Pacific Islanders carry significantly more, sometimes as much as 6%, and some of these Denisovan genes continue to confer survival benefits even today. Recall those Denisovan genetic variants that aid in processing oxygen at high altitudes? They remain active in today's Tibetan populations, enabling them to thrive at heights that would disable most humans. Another Denisovan gene variant, found in certain Pacific Island communities, influences how body fat is distributed. This seems like a change, shaped by traditional ways of life at sea, aiding in flotation and temperature control when spending extended time in water. Long ago, interbreeding gave our ancestors pre-made adjustments for life on islands. Yet, the truly remarkable part is this. Those meetings with other kinds of humans did more than pass along helpful genes. They provided us with a stronger genetic arsenal. In general, mixing increased genetic variety among the moving groups that had lost variety due to founder effects. It was as if our forebears stumbled upon genetic caches abandoned by their evolutionary relatives and took whatever proved beneficial. This questions earlier views on human development. We once believed species were separate, distinct, battling for supremacy. The truth was far more tangled and fascinating. When different human species crossed paths, they didn't always fight. Occasionally, they worked together, built bonds, and raised families together. The lines dividing species were permeable. We are not solely one kind. We are a mixture, the outcome of several human ancestries merging. Anyone living beyond Africa carries some Neanderthal ancestry. Many individuals in Asia have Denisovan roots. Each of us is a hybrid, bearing the inheritance of many human species within our genes. New findings continue to make this narrative more complex. In 2019, researchers revealed they uncovered a piece of bone from a teenage girl who existed 90,000 years in the past. Genetic tests showed she was a first-generation mixed offspring. Her mother belonged to the Neanderthals, while her father was a Denisovan, Two separate human species came together, developed a bond, and produced a child, and we uncovered her remains. Further findings hint at the possibility of even more human species that we have not yet recognized. Certain African groups have genetic markers that don't correspond to any known human line, indicating they interbred with an unidentified ancient species. We refer to these hidden human groups that once lived in Africa as ghost populations, since they left genetic traces, but no fossil remains we have discovered. Across Asia, particular genetic signatures point to interactions with another mysterious human type distinct from Denisovans. The genetic proof exists, yet their identity and fate remain unknown. This tale grows ever more intricate. With each fresh ancient DNA specimen and every new fossil discovery, another hidden chapter comes to light. The evolution of humans was not a straightforward tree with neatly separated limbs. Instead, it resembled a woven river, many separate currents that often flowed apart, yet sometimes joined together, swapped genetic elements, and then parted ways once more. This deeply influences our current comprehension of human variation. The physical and genetic distinctions among human groups are not age-old separations. They're quick adjustments to nearby surroundings, paired with tiny portions of DNA from meetings with other human species. We are not distinct races marked by profound biological differences. We are a remarkably recent species that passed through a major genetic contraction, then quickly spread and adjusted to various habitats within mere thousands of generations. There simply hasn't been sufficient time for major genetic split among groups. The variations we observe are merely skin-deep modifications that developed rapidly because they offered direct survival benefits. Grasping this truth is important. Over many centuries, individuals have exploited slight bodily differences to reason that other human groups are inherently separate or lesser. But genetic research makes it clear that these notions lack any scientific foundation. Every living human traces back to the same tiny population that went through the bottleneck. We possess 99.9% identical DNA to any other person on the planet. Those old migratory journeys did not produce different human kinds. They generated one unified human species with minor adjustments to local surroundings. All of us come from Africa originally. And if our forebears migrated out of Africa, we all hold Neanderthal genetic material. We are all shaped by identical evolutionary forces and the same ancient paths. Yet those travels bestowed something extra upon us: cultural variety. As human groups dispersed around the globe and adjusted to diverse climates, they created countless distinct ways of existing as humans. Various tongues, diverse tools, differing social organizations, and unique worldviews. Language experts have tracked language groups backwards across ages, building family trees that reflect the genetic signs of human movement. The modern languages heard across Europe, Iran, and India all originate from a shared ancestral tongue known as Proto-Indo-European, likely used around 6 millennia back by groups residing to the north of the Black Sea. Chinese, Japanese, Korean, along with numerous Southeast Asian languages, belong to separate language families, mirroring the distinct migrations and evolutions of Asian peoples. Linguistic patterns among the indigenous languages of the Americas align with the idea that ancient populations migrated from Asia in several distinct waves over millennia. Much like African genetic diversity, the languages of Africa are incredibly varied. There are thousands of unique tongues on this one continent, some as dissimilar as English and Chinese. This immense linguistic variety stems from Africa being the cradle of humankind, giving its people longer stretches of time to foster such richness. During those early migrations, some of our core human abilities like learning language, passing down culture, and collaborating in sizable groups were shaped and refined. Tiny bands, venturing into uncharted lands, required enhanced communication for survival. They had to exchange information swiftly and precisely, and sustain connections over long separations. Such demands honed our mental faculties. Those who endured these treks were the adaptable ones, quick to pick up new abilities, communicate well, and unite to face never-before-seen obstacles. We are the heirs to those very traits. These abilities enable present-day humans to inhabit environments ranging from frozen Arctic plains to steamy rainforests and even space stations. Yet we also carry inherited weaknesses. Recall the founder effects and population bottlenecks? These events didn't merely shrink genetic variety, they also raised our vulnerability to specific hereditary conditions. When small populations experience bottlenecks, they build up detrimental mutations that natural selection would typically weed out in larger groups. That explains why certain inherited disorders are more prevalent in particular groups. Tay-Sachs among Ashkenazi Jews, sickle cell anemia in people from malaria-endemic areas, and cystic fibrosis in northern European communities. These conditions do not indicate that these groups are fundamentally less robust. Instead, they arise from founder effects, population bottlenecks, and occasionally from mutations that were beneficial in specific settings but become harmful when inherited from both parents. Grasping this helps us enhance medical therapies and genetic testing initiatives. It also underscores that our human genetic pool, although limited, is invaluable. Each population harbors distinctive genetic variations that could become important later on. Whenever a group vanishes or merges with another, we forfeit genetic richness that evolved over millennia. The imprint of those early migrations also shapes our self-perception. Our inclination to form group identities and divide the world into us versus them likely developed during those ancient travels. Tiny bands moving through perilous lands required tight-knit unity. They had to rely on and collaborate with fellow members, while remaining cautious of strangers who could compete for shared resources. This strategy worked effectively for eons. Yet in our modern globalized society, it generates challenges. We continue to sort individuals by looks, speech, and customs. Even though we recognize these distinctions are skin-deep, our minds are programmed for small-scale teamwork, while today's world demands worldwide collaboration. Yet there is a promising aspect. We also possess the gift of creativity, adaptability, and cultural interchange that enabled our forebears to flourish. Homo sapiens thrive not due to being the strongest, swiftest, or even most intelligent. Our success came from our ability to adjust, acquire knowledge, and cooperate. Now, we confront perils our ancestors could never picture: climate shifts, worldwide outbreaks, dwindling resources, and atomic arms. Confronting these dangers demands collaboration on a level far exceeding what our evolution prepared us for. Yet, the very traits that guided our forebears through the bottleneck and across the globe inspire optimism. We possess the capacity to adjust. We are capable of creating new solutions. We can unite when staying alive depends on it. The narrative of human movement is, at its heart, a tale of endurance, a species that once dwindled to just a few thousand members, a population that endured climates and terrains that seemed utterly inhospitable. Bands that ventured into the unknown armed only with stone implements and intelligence didn't just survive, they prospered. Each living human today traces lineage to those resilient survivors. We inherit their DNA, their adjustments, their cleverness. Whenever you encounter a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, recall that your forebears made it through the bottleneck. They left Africa and stepped into a mysterious realm, traversing deserts and oceans. They weathered ice ages and erected the earliest civilizations. That heritage lives on in every cell of your being. Those ancient voyages shaped our very essence, flexible, creative, and tough, able to achieve remarkable feats when pushed by circumstance. Yet, many scientific enigmas persist. We continue to unearth fresh fossils, decode ancient DNA, and uncover clues about lost human species and mysterious journeys. Every couple of years, a fresh finding reshapes part of our narrative. That ancient population crunch from 900,000 years ago I mentioned? We only learned about it in 2023. And the hybrid girl with Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry? That discovery came in 2019. In just the past few years, evidence has emerged showing humans reached the Americas far earlier than previously believed. The tale of our beginnings and wanderings is far from complete, yet what has been revealed so far is truly astonishing. And every thread of this story leads back to you. In this very moment, no matter your location, you are the result of the most incredible voyage ever recounted. And that voyage continues still. So, here we find ourselves, the conclusion of the most remarkable journey ever narrated. Starting with just 1,280 resilient souls, clustered in small bands throughout Africa, holding on to life through 117,000 years of harsh climatic turmoil and culminating in 8 billion individuals inhabiting every corner of the globe, dwelling in cities that would appear magical to our distant forebears. This is the story of the early humans who ventured out of Africa. They endured, adjusted, and flourished. They met their evolutionary relatives, and at times battled them, at times embraced them, and occasionally did both. They traversed deserts that would claim a modern adventurer within days. They sailed vast seas in vessels we can scarcely picture. They trekked over ice sheets a mile deep and pursued creatures capable of killing them with one strike. And in the end, they prevailed. Not because of physical strength, Neanderthals were more powerful. Not because they were ideally suited to any one habitat. Those specialized roles had already been occupied by the Denisovans. Their victory came from being versatile, adjustable, able to examine seemingly insurmountable obstacles and devise entirely novel solutions. Each technological breakthrough we've covered, hafted spears, stitched garments, boat construction springs from a person conceiving a notion that had never occurred to anyone. An individual viewing a difficulty and envisioning an answer that hadn't yet been created. This is the true inheritance of that population crunch. More than mere survival, it's the potential for constant creativity. Ponder the significance. Your forebears, regardless of who you are or where you're listening, endured a demographic collapse that shrank humankind to its very smallest sustainable size. They lived through glacial periods stretching over tens of millennia. They conquered seas without the aid of compasses or charts. They made homes in rainforests, highlands, arid wastes, frozen plains, remote islands, every kind of habitat Earth could present. They achieved this using stone implements, controlled flames, and nothing beyond their intellect, their teamwork, and an unwavering determination to persevere through hardship. Genetic evidence reveals that every person with non-African heritage bears Neanderthal DNA. Anyone of Asian or Pacific origin carries Denisovan DNA. All of us are living proof of those age-old meetings, instances where our forebears encountered other human lineages and, at least occasionally, opted for union rather than strife. Yet beyond that, we each carry the genetic imprint of that population, squeeze the chromosomal merger that defined our species 900,000 years ago. The brain adaptations that were favored throughout those trying millennia, the abilities for speech, abstract thought, and inventive creation that enabled our ancestors not only to endure, but to reshape the planet according to their vision. When you find yourself stuck in traffic, annoyed at being late for your job, you're employing cognitive skills that were honed during Ice Age pursuits. As you manage intricate social dynamics in your workplace or classroom, you're tapping into a social wisdom that developed to sustain family bonds over huge distances. While acquiring a fresh skill via a YouTube clip, you're practicing the same cultural transmission skills that enabled stone tool craft to disseminate across landmasses. The archaeological evidence gives us the tangible relics of this odyssey. Stone implements strewn along migratory paths, cave murals signaling the dawn of symbolic reasoning, and graves indicating ever more sophisticated spiritual convictions. Yet the true narrative is inscribed in our genes and our actions. We are the kind that made it through the unendurable, the group that rebounded from the brink of annihilation. Think of the descendants of those who looked upon frozen wastelands, vast oceans, and endless deserts, and chose to cross them anyway. This is more than history. It is heritage, your heritage. No matter where you come from or what you look like, because all modern humans trace back to that same small group of African survivors. Every one of us bears the legacy of their determination, their adaptability, and their steadfast refusal to believe any challenge was truly impossible. So, when next you face something difficult, something that feels beyond your reach, remember that you come from a lineage that survived actual extinction events. Within you flowed genes that were shaped in the crucible of the most severe climate catastrophe humanity has ever faced. Your cognitive abilities were honed through hundreds of millennia of constant adaptation to shifting conditions. The ancient strides that carried humanity out of Africa to every corner of the world still echo in your DNA. The curiosity that drove them to see what lay beyond the next horizon still lives in your mind. The courage that allowed them to venture into unknown lands confronting unknown dangers, beats in your heart. We are the legacy they left behind. All the achievements of modern civilization, every technology, every work of art, every scientific discovery trace back to the survival traits that were selected during the bottleneck and refined during the great migrations that followed. The early humans who left Africa did not merely survive, they created us. Everything we are, everything we have done, and everything we are capable of becoming began with those ancient travelers who looked upon an unknown world and decided to explore it. That is what became of them, they became us. If this journey through deep time has moved you, please tap that like button. Leave a comment letting me know where you are listening from, which part of the world your ancestors helped settle. And subscribe if you want more stories about the incredible history written in our genes and scattered across the archaeological record. Because this is your story, our story, the story of the species that refused to die. Sleep well, knowing that you carry the echo of ancient footsteps in every cell of your being.